Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're tackling a topic that's been making headlines. And, yeah, it's got a lot of people talking the U.S., Russia, and the future of Ukraine.
Yeah, this one is complex, that's for sure. I think what's most interesting to me, though, is how this news story kind of lays bare the bigger picture. We're not just talking about one regional conflict here. This has global implications.
Exactly. And we're going to unpack all of that just from one article. It's from VOA News. Kremlin hails Putin-Trump dialogue as a promising, dated February 23rd, so just a few days ago.
And VOA generally considered a neutral source, so what they're reporting is even more noteworthy. We're going to be like detectives here, untangling motivations and consequences.
All right, so get ready for some aha moments, folks.
Yeah, you might be surprised what we can uncover about global strategy just by reading between the lines.
Okay, so the article starts with this bombshell. Trump, just out of the blue, has a phone call with Putin. Now, a phone call may not seem like much, but...
Right, but for years, U.S. policy, and most of the West really, has been to isolate Putin diplomatically. So this sudden shift to direct dialogue has everyone wondering, what's Trump's endgame here?
And then it gets even more curious, because right after the phone call, top U.S. and Russian officials, they meet in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, on the surface, it looks like it's about restoring ties, maybe working towards a ceasefire.
But here's where things get interesting.
It's about who wasn't at the meeting. No one from Ukraine, and no European leaders, which is, well, it's a huge break from protocol, and it's caused quite a stir in Kyiv and Brussels. They're basically being sidelined in discussions about their own future.
Zelensky, I bet, is not thrilled about being left out of the conversation. And you've got Ukraine and Europe voicing their concerns, but of course the Kremlin is putting a positive spin on it all.
Yeah, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called the talks promising and emphasized the political will to find a solution. But the question is, a solution for who?
Because here's another curveball from the article. The Kremlin is making it crystal clear that returning any territory seized in eastern Ukraine is completely off the table.
Yeah, that's a tough stance. They're really drawing a line in the sand.
Peskov states that the people there decided to join Russia a long time ago. No one will ever sell off these territories. That's the most important thing. Talk about a strong statement.
Well, that's really the heart of the issue, isn't it? Ukraine wants to reclaim its lost land, and Russia's basically saying, not a chance. It begs the question, can there even be a peace deal when the two sides have such different goals?
And the timing of all this adds another layer. The article comes out on Russia's Defender of the Fatherland Day, which is a holiday honoring their military.
Which makes Putin's message to Russian servicemen that day particularly interesting. He says, fate willed it so, God willed it so. A mission as difficult as it is honorable defending Russia has been placed on our and your shoulders together. This holiday isn't just about celebrating veterans. It's about pushing this idea of Russia as a strong nation that's constantly under threat.
So he's really using this platform to reinforce this narrative that Russia is just defending itself, which justifies his actions in Ukraine. But hold on, because while all these talks are happening, things on the ground are actually getting worse.
Right. The article mentions a surge in the Russian drone attacks on Ukraine, 267 drones in one night, and even Kyiv was a target. Talk about a contrast, peace talks happening at the same time as escalating violence.
It almost feels like they're speaking two different languages. And amidst all of this, Zelensky is pleading for a lasting and just peace. He's calling for continued Western support. It's like he's talking to a completely different audience.
It really highlights the disconnect between what's going on in these closed-door talks and the reality on the ground. Zelensky's fighting for his country's survival while negotiations are happening without him even there. It really makes you think about the power dynamics at play here.
And as if it couldn't get any more complicated, Trump steps into the scene. And not in the way you might think.
Yeah, what's so fascinating is that he launches these public attacks on Zelensky, accusing him of starting the war and making inappropriate remarks. And you rarely ever see a U.S. president criticize a wartime ally so openly.
Is he trying to undermine Zelensky's credibility? Is this about driving a wedge between Ukraine and its Western allies?
Almost feels like he's playing right into Putin's hands, doesn't it?
The article quotes Peskov even saying no president would tolerate that kind of treatment. They are definitely loving that.
It's like a high-stakes poker game, and everyone's trying to outmaneuver each other. But the stakes aren't chips here. It's people's lives and the future of nations.
So let's recap. We've got Trump seemingly aligning with Putin, peace talks happening without Ukraine-present violence escalating, and now Trump publicly criticizing Zelensky. Talk about a powder keg. And we haven't even gotten to the most explosive part yet.
Oh, yeah. Things are about to get even more interesting. Buckle up. Well, according to the article, French President Macron and British Prime Minister Starmer are both scheduled to visit Washington next week.
Ooh, okay, so Washington is about to become the center of international diplomacy. What do you think Macron and Starmer are walking into here? What's their mission?
Yeah, it's like all eyes are on Washington right now. It's very likely they're heading there for some serious damage control. Imagine trying to convince Trump to keep supporting Ukraine and present a united front against Russia after he just publicly bashed their leader.
Yeah, that's going to be tough, for sure. And this isn't just some diplomatic spat. This could be a turning point in global politics. This shift in U.S. policy, it could have huge consequences, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world order.
Absolutely. It's like the tectonic plates of geopolitics are shifting. You've got the Kremlin pushing their narrative of a liberated eastern Ukraine that'll never be returned. Zelensky is just trying to keep his country afloat, pleading for the West to hold the line. And then you've got Trump, whose actions and words seem to be driving a wedge between the U.S. and its allies.
It's a mess. Honestly, this whole situation is kind of making my head spin. We've got all these competing interests and perspectives clashing. How is anyone supposed to make sense of it all?
That's why it's so important to break down these complex events into smaller pieces. We need to understand the historical context, the motivations of the key players, and the potential consequences. That's what we're doing here, right? Cutting through all the noise to get to the truth.
Exactly. So let's take a step back for a second. What are the most important things for our listeners to remember here? What are the key takeaways from this article?
Well, the most obvious one is that we might be witnessing a major shift in U.S. foreign policy. Trump seems to be siding more with Putin than with our traditional Western allies. And that's created a huge rift in the international community and emboldened Russia to keep going with its aggression in Ukraine.
It's like the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But in this case, it's more like the enemy of my ally is my new friend. It just, I don't know, it feels wrong.
And it raises some serious questions about the future of alliances like NATO. You know, for decades, NATO has been the cornerstone of European security. But if the U.S., the leading member of NATO, is now getting cozy with Russia, what does that mean for the security guarantees that have kept Europe stable for so long?
So that's one major takeaway, shifting alliances and a potential weakening of NATO. What else should our listeners be thinking about?
Another important takeaway is that despite all this talk about peace negotiations, the conflict in Ukraine is far from over. The situation on the ground is still really volatile, and the recent surge in those drone attacks, well, that's a stark reminder of that. Like every time there's a little bit of hope for peace, the violence escalates and innocent people get caught in the crossfire.
It's heartbreaking, and it makes you wonder how sincere these peace talks really are. If Russia won't even consider giving back any of the territory they've taken, are they just stalling for time? Is this all just a distraction from the violence that's still going on?
That's a really good question, and it leads to another crucial takeaway. The outcome of these U.S.-Russia talks is still up in the air. While the Kremlin is saying they're a success, their actions seem to say that they're not willing to make any concessions. And that leaves Ukraine in a really tough spot with their future completely uncertain.
It's like David and Goliath, but with way higher stakes. And speaking of power imbalances, let's not forget Trump's attacks on Zelensky. Those are really concerning not only because they weaken Western unity, but also because they make you question the U.S.'s commitment to helping Ukraine.
Exactly. If the leader of the free world is publicly bashing the leader of a country that's fighting for its survival, what message does that send to the rest of the world? What does it say about America's reliability as an ally?
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. We started with a phone call and ended up talking about a potential global power shift, the erosion of international norms, and the future of peace. It's a lot to take in, but I'm really glad we had this conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. These are important conversations to have. We need to encourage people to think critically about the events that are shaping our world.
To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insight and helped you understand the complexities surrounding the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. If anything, it's a reminder that what happens in one part of the world can have huge consequences everywhere else. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep the conversation going, because your voice matters. Until next time, keep diving deep, everyone. So with everything we've talked about today, do you think these U.S.-Russia talks could actually lead to peace in Ukraine? Or is it all just a show? Like, are they hiding something worse?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It's really impossible to say for sure, but we can look at what might happen as a result of these talks, both for Ukraine and for the world. I mean, if Russia gets to keep the territory it took by force, what does that tell other countries with similar goals?
Yeah, that's a scary thought. It's like we're saying it's okay to be aggressive and take what you want. What happens to the rules then? The international order is supposed to keep things stable.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It sets a really dangerous precedent. It could embolden authoritarian regimes everywhere and maybe even lead to more conflicts. It also undermines the whole idea of national sovereignty, like countries having the right to their own territory. Those are like the basic principles of international law.
So it's not just about Ukraine's borders then, it's about the whole system that's been preventing wars for decades. It could all fall apart.
Exactly, and it raises questions about the UN, NATO, all of that. If powerful countries can just ignore the rules and change borders whenever they want, what's the point of having these organizations?
It feels like we're at this crossroads, you know? Do we stick to the rules or do we let things descend into chaos?
That's a great way to put it. We're seeing two totally different worldviews clashing here, and the outcome is going to affect us for generations. It's a time for action and a recommitment to diplomacy and working together.
So what can regular people like our listeners do? When it's all so huge and complicated, it's hard to know where to even start.
Well, staying informed is key. Don't let the complexity stop you from learning and trying to understand. The more we know about what's happening, the better we can make decisions and hold our leaders accountable.
Right, knowledge is power. But what about beyond staying informed? What can we actually do to make a difference?
We can support organizations that are helping people in Ukraine. We can contact our representatives and tell them to prioritize diplomacy and peace. And we can talk to our friends and families, raise awareness, and promote understanding.
Those are all great ideas. It reminds us that even when things seem really big and scary, our actions can still matter.
Absolutely. Even small acts of compassion and speaking up can make the world a more just and peaceful place. Don't forget that your voice matters. Together, we can make a difference.
Well, this has been an eye-opening deep dive. We went from a phone call to talking about global power shifts and the future of peace. It's definitely a lot to process, but I'm really glad we had this conversation. Thanks for your insights.
It was my pleasure. It's important to have these discussions and get people thinking critically about what's happening in the world.
To our listeners, we hope this deep dive gave you some context and a better understanding of what's going on with the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. It's a reminder that we're all connected. What happens in one place affects us all. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep engaging because your voice matters. Until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.